Okay, so real quick, since my thinking process is all over the place, I'm going to talk about my Popplet and my concept map. So first, behaviorism, the original one, the very first idea of thinking and learning. It is really used. It uses Bloom's taxonomy to, in a very traditional sense. Bloom's taxonomy. It has the, excuse me, the 5 levels, and with the behaviorism model, it really doesn't want to allow for movement between the levels. We start at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go all the way up. It does not really want to um, allow a student to move any further or move backwards. There's no backwards movement within uh, Bloom's taxonomy and the behaviorism model. That's sort of something that I have inferred with Bloom's taxonomy is that, well, to an extent, is that there's not supposed to be any sort of backwards movement. You just start with 1, go all the way up through 5. So with behaviorism, the whole idea is that the student is given this learning process and then they internalize it to sort of make it their own. The teacher, uh, they put the student into an environment that they can change in order to get what they want out of it. So the teacher will put them in an environment, give different stimuli, and then change them in order to get the desired outcome. So first one is respondent conditioning. The first set of conditioning I'll talk about. Uh, it's one of the two um, portions of the SR or stimulus response model. Respondent conditioning is the classical Pavlovian conditioning that where you will control the stimuli to reach the desired outcome. I said that earlier. So stimulus generalization, I'll go over that real quick, is when you are given all kinds of different stimuli and you begin to take all of them and then start to take different portions out of it, out of each the different ones. So every time you're faced with a different experience, you begin to see the similarities of each experience. So you take your previous experiences and apply it. Then you would move on to discrimination, not learning, where you can take the old portions or the new portions of this example or this stimuli out and from the older stimuli, which will then allow them to have created the teacher to create an environment change and move on. The student will have learned a little bit. So then the systematic desensitization, which is used a little bit more in uh, what's that called? Therapy with psychologists, and that like if you're afraid of spiders, you are put into a situation where there is one spider, and then you tolerate that 2, 3, 4, 5 spiders until you get to the point where you can be in an environment where there are a ton of spiders and not be afraid. So, and then this last idea with respondent conditioning, spontaneous recovery. That's more so an example that they showed was with drug relapse, and you are out, you've made it all the way through rehab, and then you relapse back to whatever it might be, drugs, alcohol, and it's because the stimulus of drinking alcohol or doing drugs is too strong in order for the new environment to um, change that behavior. So, with the idea of behaviorism, which is very, very old school, ironic, pardon the pun, um, we'll move on to social learning. And social learning, that is one that I'm a little more comfortable with. with social learning is where you are put into groups to learn, and you learn from each other. This one I found I was very easy. It was very easy for me to apply in the fact that it comes from, for me, it applied to my learning in the during undergraduate athletic training, especially before I was into the program, when I was trying to get into it, or I stood back and watched, and I learned just by watching. Um, I was put in. My teachers, whoever was running the what's called the PATS program at the time, Prospective Athletic Training Student Program at the time, they facilitated our education by requiring us to do all these observation hours, just like just about every other program. So they facilitated it mainly by me going into having to go into the athletic training room and observe. So through that, I was then in observing, which I was then able to find a model, one model that I was with a lot, was with the wrestling team. I was in that athletic training room a lot, so he became a model for me. And at first, it was just mere imitation. Once I got into the program, I looked and I wasn't really modeling too much after him. I was just, or not so much when I was in the program. Before I was in the program, I was just imitating because I didn't have a lot to do in the athletic training room setting. I just stood, watched, did what little bits and pieces I did, watched exactly how he taped an ankle, and that's what I did. I imitated his ankle taping. Whereas once I was in, the modeling became a little bit stronger because I was almost that I had a reason to learn. So then through the modeling, no longer imitating, I gained that activity, or not that activity, I gained that knowledge learned through thoughtful watching. So it was no longer imitation, it was now thoughtful watching. I took that, so I just explained it all. So from here I got to there, where I'm now taking what I learned or taking what I saw and made it my own, which brought me to my goal. Performance here, observed through, you observe performance influences reinforcements. So I obviously had a good positive role model. Granted, now had I had a negative role model who all they did was come in and complain and I hate this job, well, that enforces the negative behavior, and I probably would not have been an athletic trainer. So real quick, I kind of went backwards, but social learning, locus of control, internal and external. Internal is I'm in control of my life. I'm taking things over. I take them as they come, and I create my own destiny to an extent. External, everything's up in the air. Life does whatever it does. And then, I guess you are in control of your life. You make your own destiny. This one is whatever happens, happens. And then, so you get into this idea of learned helplessness. And I've seen this with patients or student athletes who, I'm never going to get better, I'm always injured. And you know what? If they continue to say that, nothing will get better because they they're predestined to always be hurt because they won't make the effort to change. And they've learned this behavior of, well, nothing's going to change, I can't get any better. You see this in abusive relationships too. Adult children of alcoholics, they constantly go back and find relationships that will put them in this state of learned helplessness because that's all they've known. So social learning, from what I picked up, it builds a little bit more off of Bloom's taxonomy and the behaviorism model, because it sort of allows for movement between the stages. It's not as linear because you find your model and then so you start with your knowledge base and your knowledge base, which you are learning in class, and you begin comprehending and applying and then analyzing, but sometimes your application isn't all that you can't, when you analyze, you realize you're not applying it right, so you have to go back and comprehend it a little bit more with this. So we see here we're starting to move into the newer version of Bloom's taxonomy, but socialization is still, social learning is still a little bit isn't there just yet. Cognitivism, we'll move on to that one. That one is a little tougher because it's, as we wrote in our journal, it's thinking about it's got the idea of metacognition, or thinking about thinking. And what it is you learn how the student learns. And so once you learn how they learn, you can change the environment in order to um, make them better, put them in the right situations where they can think in the ways that are necessary. So it's an active educator role, just like the behaviorism model. So, but in the same breath, you educate through facilitation by educating with, you facilitate that correct environment. So you see, with the students, they have to have prior knowledge, because they're sort of thrown out there to where there's things that for cognitivism to work, it's on the assumption that they already know things going in. So you can't really give this to, well, you can give it to kindergartners and first graders, but obviously it's very low level thinking. So it isn't the easiest to do, because again, you have to assume that everyone in the class is at the same skill, knowledge, and level knowledge. So information processing, rather um, self describes itself. I can't think of what I'm trying to say, but so the information is described to the learner. It's created into memories. They create these memories through mental pictures. Can go ahead and connect that there. So in information processing, it gives the instructor the ability to evaluate mistakes in learning from the student, so they can then go back and change the environment a little bit so that they can give them a better shot to learn. Metacognition, we spoke about learning how someone learns, or thinking about someone thinks. So once the instructor or facilitator knows how the student or students thinks and learns, they can then change the environment, help them grow, give them a little bit of feedback to as how to begin to get better. There's a little bit of one thing about Gestalt principles. Gestalt, he was very big into cognition, and he pretty much said to keep it kind of simple with learning, because you don't want to go overboard. You just need to lay the he laid the groundwork for other perspectives. So essentially, here what it says in the text, he didn't Gestalt didn't focus on uh, the actual stimuli. He focused on the pattern or the thoughts, or cognitive development, as I have here. So he focused on how the individuals thought and learned, into the metacognition idea, and so he then changed the thought process, or tried to change different qualities of the individual's thought process. And then here, as I said earlier, educator identifies the level. So in order to, should connect that, in order to have this prior knowledge, the educator must, oh boy, we're just going to leave that alone. The educator must identify the level of thinking that they're at. So the goal here is to change the behavior through changing and or by the teacher adapting their style to suit the student's needs. So finally, constructivism. Constructivism was a little tough for me because essentially it's just building ideas. It's self-directed learning, it's putting students in groups, and it's posing small questions and letting the students construct their own ideas and go from there. So each day, each lesson builds off of one another. They start where they stopped the day before, and then so they've constructed their ideas. Once the group has so here's the posing the idea, the groups, discussion, they have their discussion here. So once the groups have then created their ideas, the student can go back and take the information that they have and create it and build their own models of what it looks like in their head, instead of having this discrete laid out plan of this is exactly how it is, sort of how it is in cognitivism. They say, well, this, and this is how you have to think about it, where constructivism will allow you to go back and take it on your own and make it your own. So cognitive or constructivism, excuse me, is moving all the way through the what's that called? The spectrum of Bloom's taxonomy. So we're kind of going very beginning to starting to change it to kind of starting to change it a little bit, to getting to a little bit more of a change here, and then this here, constructivism, is the really big change, I feel, to the learning theories. So here are my sources, my cites from the reading, and there we go.